Did you know that in South Korea, the financial reward for physical labor has actually decreased since the year 2000?
Yeah, while the value of working with data has just steadily climbed.
It's a pretty dramatic flip, really. And today we're going to, unpack the research that explains this surprising shift.
That opening really hits the nail on the head.
Hmm.
Today, our focus is on this compelling research paper that looks into how job skills and, well, their financial rewards changed in South Korea,
Right.
specifically between 1993 and 2016.
Exactly. And what's so useful here isn't just like broad economic talk.
Right.
This research gives us really specific details. Which skills became more prized, which became less so over those couple of decades. Think of it as a detailed look under the hood of a job market that was changing, well, really
And
fast.
just to give you a sense of the groundwork, the researchers based their analysis on quite extensive data.
Okay.
This includes multiple editions of the Korean Job Dictionary, which is a very detailed resource describing what different jobs actually involve, and also data from the survey on employment patterns.
Hmm.
So it's a pretty robust data set covering that 1993 to 2016 period. Gives a strong basis for what they found.
So our mission today really is to pull out the most crucial insights from this research about how different kinds of skills, education levels, even years of experience were valued in the South Korean job market back then.
Yep. We're aiming for a deep understanding that goes, beyond just the surface level stuff.
Okay, so here's where things start to get really interesting.
Indeed. One of the first things the paper tackles is how we even define and measure skill.
Right. Because traditionally, people just used years of education, maybe years of experience, as a kind of proxy for skill, didn't they?
Exactly.
Yeah.
As the research points out, that's a pretty limited way of looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, just knowing someone went to school for X years doesn't tell you what they can actually do.
Hmm.
So, how did the researchers get around that?
Well, they adopted what they call a multidimensional view of skill. They really dug into the detailed job descriptions in that Korean job dictionary, looking at the specifics of what different roles actually demand. And from all that detail, they used a statistical method called factor analysis.
Factor analysis, right?
You can think of it as a way to take like a whole bunch of job characteristics and statistically group them together to identify the underlying sort of core skill categories that pop up across many different jobs.
Okay, so they use this statistical tool to find the fundamental skill sets hiding in all these job descriptions. What were the main categories that came out?
So across the years, they looked at three key skill factors kept appearing, though the details of how they were defined did shift a bit over time.
Mhm.
The first one was cognitive skill. Now, initially, back around 1995, this was strongly linked to education, experience, analyzing data, and interestingly, even interpersonal abilities. They called it mutual skill back then.
Hmm. Interesting that social skills were kind of lumped in with cognitive stuff at first. How did that change?
Yeah, that's a key evolution. Over time, that interpersonal part, which later got linked more with sensory skill,
Yeah.
it became more distinct. So the second factor is physical sensory skill.
Mm.
This actually started as one combined factor in 95, covering both physical strength and sensory abilities.
Right.
But by 2002, it had split into separate physical and sensory skill factors. Sensory skill became more about things like manual dexterity and good eyesight.
Okay, so we have cognitive skills, then physical strengths as its own thing, and sensory skills like fine motor control, also separate. What about that initial mutual or interpersonal skill you mentioned?
Well, that initial mutual skill factor, the one related to communication and working together, it's quite revealing.
How so?
While it was a factor early on, the analysis shows its characteristics kind of shifted and got absorbed into other skill categories over time. It particularly influenced how they defined cognitive and sensory skills in the later versions of the job dictionary.
Got it. So these core skill categories weren't static. They actually adapted over the years, reflecting how the workforce itself was changing.
Precisely. And what's really insightful is looking at how important these different factors became. The researchers checked the percentage of variance each factor explained in different years.
Yeah.
Their findings showed a really clear trend. Cognitive skills just became increasingly dominant in explaining the differences between jobs as the period went on.
That fits, doesn't it, with technology and information work becoming more central. So, okay, now that we have these core skill types, how did the actual money, the financial rewards, change for each of them?
Right. This brings us to the idea of skill premiums.
Skill premiums.
Yeah, think of it as the extra pay someone gets just because they have a particular skill. The researchers used regression analysis, another statistical tool, to kind of isolate and measure these premiums for each skill type year by year.
Okay, let's get to the results then. What was the story with cognitive skills? Did they pay well?
Oh, yeah. Cognitive skill consistently commanded a significant premium throughout the whole period, 1993 to 2016.
How significant?
Well, depending on the exact statistical model they ran, this premium was somewhere between, say, 17% and maybe up to 45%.
Wow, that's a big range, but consistently positive.
Very positive. And interestingly, they saw a peak around 2010, then a slight dip afterwards, which actually lines up with findings from some other research too. So yeah, the big takeaway, consistently high financial value for cognitive abilities.
Okay, strong, enduring reward for brain power. Now, what about physical skills? I feel like this connects back to that statistic we started with.
It absolutely does. The research showed a clear negative return, basically, a wage penalty for physical skills. And this got particularly noticeable starting in the 2000s.
A penalty, so you earn less.
Yes. The penalty was somewhere around a med of 8%, down to -1% in one model, and a similar downward trend in another. By 2016, it ended up being about a -3% wage penalty. So yeah, the financial value of jobs relying heavily on physical labor was definitely going down.
And sensory skills, things like dexterity, precision work.
Those also showed a negative trend overall. And the decline was actually quite significant in the later years of the study.
Really?
Yeah, by 2016, the wage penalty tied to sensory skills had dropped to around -10%. That's even lower than the penalty for physical skills at that point.
Wow. So cognitive skills rising in value, physical and sensory skills falling. What's the big picture reason for this massive shift?
Well, the paper points strongly towards skill bias technological change, or SBTC.
SBTC.
The basic idea is that new technology tends to automate, routine physical tasks, and even some tasks needing those sensory skills.
Right.
But at the same time, it increases the demand for higher-level cognitive skills, the skills needed to manage, analyze, and innovate with these new technologies.
That makes a lot of sense. Tech takes over the manual stuff, so you need more brain power to run the tech. Now, the research also looked at education and experience, right? The traditional measures. What happened there?
Yes, they did. They looked at returns to what they called excess education, basically, having more education than a job typically requires.
And excess experience, same idea, more experience than usually needed. They found the return on that excess education was generally higher than for excess experience. But importantly, both showed an overall decreasing trend during the study period.
So just piling on extra qualifications beyond what the job needed wasn't paying off as much over time.
Seems like it. Having those extra credentials or years didn't guarantee significantly higher pay, quite like it might have earlier.
Interesting. So what about just the straightforward returns, like the benefit of each additional year of school or each year of work experience in general?
Those trends are also pretty telling. The return you got for each year of education, it actually peaked around 2008 and then started to decline. By 2016, it had even dipped slightly below the level it was at back in 1993.
Really? Below 1993 levels?
Yeah, and the drop was even more pronounced for the return on total years of work experience over that same period.
So the simple benefit of just racking up more years of schooling or work was also kind of fading a bit.
Exactly. And here's a really crucial point they made.
When the researchers statistically controlled for the specific skills needed in a job, it actually reduced the estimated return they calculated for education itself.
Oh, okay. So what does that suggest?
It suggests that a big part of why education pays off isn't just having the degree, the piece of paper. It's about the actual skills that education helps you develop.
That's a really important distinction. It's capability, not just the credential. Now, the study also looked at specific job functions, didn't it? Like working with data, people, or things.
Yes, and this gave some very specific, very significant results. The standout finding was about the data function.
Okay.
Jobs that heavily involve working with data saw their financial return significantly increase between 2000 and 2016. It went up from about 6.6% to 10%.
Wow, that really hammers home the point about data skills we've been talking about.
Absolutely. It underlines that growing value.
What about jobs focused on people, like interactions or working with physical objects, the things function?
Well, the trends for the people function and the things function weren't statistically significant in the same way, but they generally showed declining returns. So it further supports that bigger picture shift towards data-oriented skills being more valued in the South Korean labor market at that time.
Now, this research covers, what, over 2 decades? Did it shed light on any persistent issues like, say, the gender wage gap?
Yes. Unfortunately, it did. The research consistently found a significant wage penalty for women, right through the entire period they studied.
How significant are we talking?
Women earned at least 21% less than men, even after accounting for other factors.
That's really stark. Did that gap change at all over the 20
I,
plus years?
they did note some change. The male wage premium started higher, around 31% back in 93.
Okay.
And it did gradually decrease, getting down to about 22% by 2016. But I mean, that's still a huge gap.
Yeah.
And it persisted even when they controlled for differences in education, experience, skills, even the size of the company people worked for. They also noted that penalty for women tended to get slightly worse right after economic downturns. So yeah, some narrowing, but a substantial gap absolutely remained.
And one last factor, company size. Did working for a big company versus a small one make a difference?
Yes, that showed up consistently too. Working in smaller firms was associated with a wage penalty compared to working in the larger firms, the ones with 500 or more employees.
Okay.
So that suggests company size is another piece of the puzzle influencing wages beyond just your individual skills and background.
Right. Okay. We have covered a lot of ground here. If someone's listening, what are the absolute key takeaways?
Well, I'd say the biggest shifts are, one, the clear rise in the financial value of cognitive skills, especially data-related skills.
Mm-hmm.
Two, the flip side, the decreasing financial return for jobs heavy on physical and certain sensory skills.
Got it. Cognitive up, physical sensory down.
Exactly. Then there's the persistent and still large gender wage gap. And finally, this complex picture for education and experience, where it's not just about years anymore, but the specific skills you have seem increasingly critical for your earnings.
So the big aha moment here feels like just having more years of school or more years on the job isn't the automatic path to higher pay it might have seemed like before.
Right.
What's becoming more and more important are the specific capabilities you bring, especially those related to handling information, analyzing things.
That's it, exactly. The demand is clearly growing for those abilities that work well with new technology that drive innovation. And this has real implications, for your own career, maybe if you're thinking about changing careers, or even if you're advising young people on education or training.
Yeah, understanding these long-term shifts can really help make informed decisions about where to focus skill development.
Definitely.
This has been incredibly insightful, a proper deep dive into how the value of skills has evolved. So maybe a final thought for everyone listening to mull over. Given these trends we saw up to 2016, how might the even faster tech changes since then, especially the rise of AI, be further reshaping the value of these different skills today?
That's the big question, isn't it?
What new skills might be rocketing up in value right now? It's definitely worth keeping an eye on current research and analysis to see how this story continues to unfold.